Well, I meant to tell you, I think last week, I forgot. Um, we're having cabinets put in our garage. We call one of these companies out that organizes the garage and all. Because if you'd have seen my garage, you'd have thought, where are you going to put cabinets? So anyway, they sent a young lady out to do the estimate. And she was from India, you could tell. So she was there an hour, I guess, hour and a half or so, telling us all about the product and, how they do. And so after she got through, I said, well, listen, I've listened to you a while. You mind listening to me for a little bit? She said, no. So I asked her, what religion was she? She was Hindu. And I said, has anybody ever told you the gospel? And she said, I don't think so. So, took me 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I sat down and went through the gospel with her. She didn't make a decision then, but what I would just suggest is if you're praying, just remember that little Indian girl that I was talking with. She seemed really interested though. So anyway, I just want to let you know. There's always opportunities. There's always opportunities, but we mostly overlook them. Just going through a checkout line, sometimes there's an opportunity. Most times there is. And it's not hard to do once you start. If you just say something about Jesus, he takes over and it becomes a lot easier. We're in chapter 31 of Genesis, and we're beginning where we left off in verse 8. If you remember last week, Jacob realized that Laban and his sons were kind of enraged about him having more increase in his stock than Laban did. So the Lord told Jacob to return to Canaan, and he calls Rachel and Leah together, discuss the matter, tells them the father and brother's countenance is not favorable toward him any longer. And so tells them they got to leave. God has told him to go. And so now we pick up in verse 8. Jacob begins to explain how his livestock grew much greater than Laban's. And we shouldn't be surprised because Jacob is God's man. And God's going to take care of Jacob. So that's what we see. Let's look at it, verse 8 through 11, or I'm sorry, 8 through 13. If he said thus, speaking of Laban, the speckle shall be your wages, then all the flock bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift your eyes now and see. All the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. Jacob is explaining why he has so much more livestock than Laban did. Because God would make sure that the lambs that were mated was mated by one that was spotted or speckled. So every time they had a baby, it was spotted or speckled, which would go to Laban. That was their agreement. That was his wages for taking care of them. And the story there is you want God on your side, and you want to be faithful to God. Now, Jacob wasn't always faithful, which gives us hope, doesn't it? Because I know none of us are always faithful. But There are some things that we'd want to get revenge on people on, aren't there? You would think Laban would want to Jacob would want to get revenge on Laban the way he treated him, but God was his source of power, and he could leave it up to God to do it. It says, if he said thus, so Jacob explains everything. Then verse 11, it says, the angel of God spoke to me in a dream. Jacob tells him the reason he knows it was God is because God told him in a dream how the sheep mated, and that God had seen all that Laban was doing to him. So let's go, because I got 55 verses to go through. So let's go to verse 14 through 16. Now God has told him to get out of the land, get back to the land of your family. And then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion of inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. This is strange to me because, well, Laban's money was his money, it wasn't their money, and wouldn't be their money until he died. But this is a problem that's in all families. Do you ever notice that? When someone gets to an age where they're about to die, people get concerned about the money of their parents, don't they? And it can create really split a family. But that's outside the story here. It says, is there any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Rachel and Leah understood they had lost any potential inheritance that they might have gotten. And the money was gone. So she just said to Jacob, whatever God has said to do to you, let's do it. If he said do it, let's do it. So verses 17 through 21. Then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels. And he carried away all his livestock, all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob stole away, unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he indeed intended to flee. So he fled with all he had. He arose, crossed over the river, and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. In verse 17, Jacob's leaving with way more than he arrived with, for certain. And if you recall, he came all alone with nothing on that trip. And now he's leaving with 2 wives, 14,000 children, maybe not that many. 4 wives, 11 sons, 1 daughter, sheep, goats, camels, and he was wealthy enough to have a camel for each one of his families to ride on, I guess. God was on his side. God was on his side. Verse 19, Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And why did Rachel steal the idols? We just don't know. We're not told. But perhaps she worshiped the idols also while she was living there, and she wanted them. Or maybe she didn't, but she just wanted to do something to spite her father's treatment of her husband and her sister. We don't know. But Laban used it through, or prayed to him, I suppose, but in divination, because in verse 27 of chapter 30, he says, please stay if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. So I don't know if he had learned that from his idols or through divination with his idols or not. But I want you to notice the similarities in the contrast between Rachel stealing of her father's idols and fleeing when Jacob's, well, let me get my mouth going right. The similarities between what she did is stealing her father's idol and what Jacob did in stealing his father's blessing. In both situations, it's the younger who steals what rightfully belongs to the elder. And in both narratives, Isaac and Jacob are innocent of any part of the wrongdoing. Isaac did not know Jacob was stealing the blessing, and Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the idol. So the stealing of the idol doesn't get Rachel in trouble. And by the way, while I'm there, let me apologize. My wife told me I was calling Rachel Rebecca last week, but y'all knew who I was talking about, didn't you? So if I say Rebecca for Rachel, just remember I'm stupid, and I do things like that. I told you when I took this class that would always, go ahead. Oh, I will always mess up something. It's just my nature. I just will say something wrong, pronounce it wrong.
Yeah, right.
You know. So anyway, God tells him to get out there. It was and head to Canaan. It was nearly 300 miles from there to where he was going, but the journey was longer and more difficult psychologically probably than it was physical to Jacob, because he had left Canaan with a brother that was wanting to kill him, and now he's going back, and he doesn't know if that brother still wants to kill him or not. And we'll find out later next week. But remember the movies when we were young, we'd go to the movies and they'd have some little story, and at the end it says be continued. So you come back to the movie next week to see what happens. The lady's on the railroad track and the train's coming. You know? You remember those? That's kind of what I'm telling you here. We'll find out at the end of it next week. 22 through 24. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Now, just to me, it's interesting that Laban was told on the third day. You know, something about three, isn't there? When we was in Israel, our guide told us if there was something that was in threes, you could just take it to the bank. I mean, it was signed, sealed, delivered, and that's it. And when you see three in the Bible, you can put that monitor on it, that it's signed, sealed, and delivered. That's the end of it. That's the story. 3 days he rose. Can't think of all the threes, but there's a lot of them. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that. So he never knew that Jacob left. Jacob got out of there in a hurry, and took him 3 days before he realized it. Now, you can only presume that he's going after him because he's angry. And good things are not going to happen when he gets there. But it took him 7 days to get there, and they've been gone 3 days. That seems strange. You'd think 3 days he would catch up if he just kept going. But anyway, 7 days it took him to get there. And when he was on the way, God spoke to him. And he said, when you get there, you better not say anything good nor bad to Jacob. I know that had to just make Laban angry, because he was there. He was going to get him and bring his family back. Guarantee you. But Jacob was God's man. When you're God's man or woman, or when you're God's child, he protects you. Jacob has no idea he's being protected, but he's going to be protected. Now, I want you to know there's plenty of times you've got a situation in your life, and you don't really know God has you going to. I mean, you do because Scripture tells you that, but you don't necessarily believe it. But I want you to know, you can know if you're a child of God, God has the situation under control.
Amen.
He may not control it the way you like it controlled, but it's controlled. It was for Jacob. It says he had come to him in a dream by night. We can be assured that God is with us and looking out for us. This 20 years, 14 to 20 years Jacob was with Laban was not the most pleasant experience for Jacob or Laban. So God said, do not speak good to Jacob and do not speak bad either. So let's go on. It's 25 through 30. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? That you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword. Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs and timbrel and harp. Yeah, I bet. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. And now you have surely gone because you have greatly longed your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? I think we found his concern there, don't we? Why did you steal my gods? They pitched a tent, Laban did, in the mountains of Gilead. He finally catches up with Jacob, and his men set up camp. Laban's there to comfort Jacob and his daughters about their unannounced, not to comfort, but to confront, about an unannounced departure from his land. And even though he has been warned by God not to say anything good or bad, he still has to condemn Jacob for what he perceives as wrong or betrayal. It's funny how we can see how people betray us, but we don't see where we betray other people. Sometimes we get angry at people for the same things we do to other people. We get angry because someone said something about us to somebody else when we've done the same thing sometimes about somebody else. We're none perfect, and we none see our own faults the way others see them or the way God sees them. Notice what he says to him in verse 26. What have you done? Ironically, he begins with the same word Jacob said to him on his wedding night. Remember that? Jacob wakes up and he says, what have you done? You've given me the wrong wife. You got Leah instead of Rachel.
He hadn't been given any warning of that either. So
No.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was betrayed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we don't see our wrongs like as bad as we see other people's.
They're all deceiving one another. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Each one of them. And that's what my Bible says here. It says, what have you done? You deceived me. You carried off my daughters, which to me is a better translation, that you deceived me. I mean, isn't that what Jacob has done and Rebecca back then? They all have, and now Rachel. Laban has been a deceiver
That's
also.
their family trait.
Absolutely.
Deceiving.
DNA, huh?
And then he has concern over his daughters all of a sudden now, and his sons.
Yeah.
Or sons, you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. I'm assuming he's talking about his grandsons, his daughters. He sure didn't think that highly of them before. It didn't seem to me when he switched and just did as he did. But even though he was told not to say anything good or bad, he just had to let them know what he felt. And I guess that's okay. He withheld doing what he probably wanted to do. And he'll tell them that later. Then 31 through 32. Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. He says, I left because I was afraid you'd take them. And he had a right to believe he might do that. I mean, he switched up on them and gave them the wrong ones. And he says in verse 32, with whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what of yours and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen him. So the reason he left, he says, was because he was afraid. But God told him to leave. Now, I'm sure he was afraid, but he left because God said it's time to go back to Canaan. He probably would have gone anyway, and I'm sure he was afraid. And then he says, about the stealing of your gods, with whomever you find your God, do not let him live. Now, he had no idea Rachel had taken those idols. An idol, apparently very important to him. So he had no problem telling Laban to search their belongings and kill whoever found his goods. Now let's look at 33 and 35. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into two maids' tent, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, but put them in the camel saddle and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent. I did that thing printed twice in there. Isn't that crazy? I just copied and pasted. Anyway, and she said to her father, let it not despise my Lord that I cannot arise before you, for the manner of women is with me. And he searched, but did not find the household idols. So he went and searched through all the tents, didn't find anything. Then he goes into Rachel, where we know the idol is. And she makes the excuse that it was that time of month for her, and that's why she didn't rise and, honor her father. And that's, of course, was where they were hidden. And so the father believed his daughter, and probably didn't suspect that she would ever take it anyway, but didn't find it. So Rachel claims to have a reason for sitting there. Now, at this time, there was no law for him not to touch it, but Leviticus 15:21 later on says that he would have been unclean had he touched anything that was left unclean. Anyway, verses 36 through 42. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and have not eaten the ram of your flock. That which was born by beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hands, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. You think Jacob was a little bit angry with Laban? He took this opportunity to tell Laban exactly how he felt and how he was treated. Now, I don't think Jacob was the most honest person. I really don't. I mean, he did a lot of trickery, obviously. But while he was there, let's face it, he did do what he said he would do. He said he'd work 7 years for Rachel. He did. But he got tricked. He said he'd work another 7 years for Rachel. And he did, and he got Rachel. He said he wanted to leave and go home, and he wanted to get some wealth for himself, and he made a deal with Laban about the spotted and speckled, and they all turned out spotted and speckled, and he gained a lot of riches. And then God told him to leave, and he did. While he was with Laban, you got to admit Jacob was following God. He was faithful to God. Not so much before. Now, let's liken that to ourselves. Not so much before we were following God. We did a lot of things bad. But when we started following God and really following Him, doing what He's asked us to do, when we got saved, when we had the Holy Spirit imputed in us, and we received Him, we started following God a little closer, didn't we? A lot closer for me. We could have been pretty good people. My brother was a good guy, a lot better than me. But that turned out to be his downfall. He didn't think he needed a God. He didn't need salvation because he had been a good guy. But he measured himself with people, not with God. I think Jacob kind of realized when he got there, by seeing how he was treated, how wrong he was with what he did to his brother Esau. Although it was God's plan is going to work out, we don't know that that's the way God had planned it, but God intended it going to happen that way, and He's going to make it happen that way. Even though we have free will, we're going to mess it up. But God will always get it straightened out. So Jacob has come to this point now where, okay, you've accused me of all this, you haven't found anything, not knowing that idol was in Rachel's tent. But he was going to tell Laban exactly how he felt. And he did. And I was so proud of him when he did that. He says, unless, though, the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me. Jacob was convinced that it would have been worse had it not been for the fact that he feared God, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. Had it not been for those things, then he would have sent Jacob away empty-handed. But God was with him. It's one thing to have God on your side. It's another thing when you know it and you see it. I think I told you all the story before I was even saved about the time someone shot at me, and the firing pin hit the bullet didn't go off. I can look back now and say, God was with me. I didn't know it at the time, I was lost. But he kept me, so I would get saved. It behooves us after everything we go through to look back and see God in it. It's better if we see God in it while we're in it, if that makes sense, than to have to look back at it. 43 and 44. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, these children are my children, this flock is my flock, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to thee? What can I do this day to these my daughters, or to the children whom they have borne? Now therefore, come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. What he's saying is here, these are my children. What can I do? What he meant is God has told him he can do nothing. And so I can do nothing, but these are my children. And you have to have some sense of feeling for Laban. These are his daughters and his grandchildren. We don't want our daughters and grandchildren just to be taken away and we not see them anymore. But yet, I think he understood this God that he's dealing with, that Jacob has, is a little different from his little God that was stolen from him. You can't steal our God. And it's pretty bad when you can steal a God, isn't it? What kind of God is that? I don't think he was thinking. Come, let us make a covenant. He knew he was wrong and he was going against God. So the best he could hope for was an agreement or a covenant between the two of them. And the following verses are going to cover that covenant. So let's look at it. 45 through 50. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones, and they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jegar Shahadutha, but Jacob called it Galid. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore its name was called Galid. Also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Now, this is something that they would do back then. They would make a pillar of stones. It was called a cairn, C-A-I-R-N. But they called it a heap on this. And cairn is just stones to recognize them. They would stack up stones for waypoints. In other words, would this way to some city or this way to that city, and there would be that stack up stones. But in this case, they were stacking it to memorialize an agreement or a covenant they were making with each other. If you'll remember, he did that when he dreamed on that stone. He stacked stones and made it a cairn, C-A-I-R-N. Now, the two different names, Jegar and Shahadutha, is Arabic, and Jacob called it Galilee, which is Hebrew, and they both mean heap of witness. Same word, just different language. The mitzvah was also given the name, and that's where we get the Hebrew word meaning watchtower. And I guess that's where Jehovah's Witnesses got their magazine name, The Watchtower. I suppose, I don't know. And so they're making this covenant, and Laban says, okay, nothing I can do about it. Nothing you can do about it. But we can make this covenant that we will not be at odds with each other anymore. And then he'll explain it a little more. And he says, God is my witness if you afflict my daughters or anything. I don't know why he even thought that. Jacob had no idea of ever hurting his wives, I don't believe. He never showed them, that he would ever do that. But I think he just had to have something to make him feel worthy. So let's look at 51 through 55. Then Laban said to Jacob, here is the heap, and here is the pillow, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. It's not that they can't pass and go see each other, but not for harm. The God of Abraham, verse 53, the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their fathers judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Now, if you ask me, Laban's trip profited him nothing other than to kiss his kids goodbye. He went there with bad intentions, I'm sure. God stopped him on the way and said it's not going to happen. And now, the only thing to come out of it is that they got this marker and they're not to pass it with harm in their hearts. I don't think Jacob would have done that anyway. He didn't like Laban for sure, but he told him off and told him exactly the way he felt. Doesn't say he tried to spit on him or say anything nasty to him. He just said, this is what you've done to me. And he took it all. He did this before he could ever read the New Testament that says turn the other cheek. But isn't that what he was doing? In reality, he turned the other cheek. You see, the New Testament tells us how the Old Testament characters should have acted, and some did. But they didn't have the New Testament to teach them that. They just had the law. And they had to follow the law, which they couldn't possibly do. You know, I had read something, I had read this before, but last Wednesday night, pastor was teaching, and it wasn't pastor, I'm sorry, it was Grant. He was preaching. And he reminded me of Numbers chapter 55, I think verse 15. During the Old Testament, when they were sacrificing, there were some sins, if you did a sin intentionally, there was no sacrifice to forgive that. None whatsoever. And I guess I just forgotten that. I remember hearing that before, but it just had kind of gone out of my head. But that makes grace even more beautiful, doesn't it? Because there is no sin that grace does not forgive. That was all part of salvation, about Jesus coming to be the final sacrifice. He made it available for those who did intentional sins to be saved. That's why murderers can be forgiven. You know, there's nothing you can do that you cannot be forgiven for. So Laban departed, returned to his place. Early the next morning, Laban rises, says his goodbye, kisses and blesses his daughters, then begins to journey back home. For Laban, his trick to track down Jacob did him no good. Jacob was never going to return to harm. And Laban was stymied by God's order not to do good or bad to Jacob. Had God not have warned him, no doubt Laban would have brought harm to Jacob and brought his daughters and sons back to Haran with him. But God protected Jacob. And now Jacob's free to go home to the land promised him. God has protected us. He will protect us. And we are free to go home to be with him. And we will. We have to die to live, both spiritually and physically. All we know is this life here. And we just think it's so wonderful. We just don't ever want to die, right? Nobody wants to die. If we knew how good heaven was, we'd be wanting to die probably. You know, I mean, we all say, I wish the Lord had just come. And I do. But I don't want to die to see him. I want to be alive and take that trip. I just wonder, that's going to be remarkable. Just, here we are. Now, I know there's some might not believe that, but that's okay. They will when it happens. Because I believe it's going to happen, and I believe it's going to happen soon. Just look what's happened in our country. I've always said, and this is not meant to be political, but it probably is, okay? Everybody's saying Trump, 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 Trump. Listen, I don't really like the man. I like his policies. But I've always thought in my heart, I don't see how in the world he can get elected. It looks like he will in a landslide. But I just don't believe it. Because I believe we're close to the end time. And if he is in charge of the United States of America, we're going to back Israel. And the Bible clearly states nobody backs them. So I would say this, if he does get elected, we got a 4-year delay. That's my thought. If he doesn't, get you a cake, because we're going to fly out of here, I think. I really believe that.
Not much alternatives.
But,
Not very good choices.
yeah. Well, it wasn't, I read the other day, it's not the donkey or the elephant. It's going to save us. It's the lamb.
Yes.
Amen.
And there is no political party that uses a lamb. Maybe we all start one. 12 o'clock. How's that? Perfect. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Father, you're always with us. And I think Jacob's story proves that. And we'll see a little later how you still hang in there. But we'll see his name become the most mentioned name in the world today. And that's the name of Israel. It's just amazing how one little tiny country is in the center of all the news today. You're an amazing God, and you do amazing things. The most amazing thing you ever did saved me. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Bert,
Yes.
my Bible has this commentary about the gift, you know,